Paul and I have been talking on and off for a number of weeks now, maybe even a number of months. We've been on a few spaces together, some as speakers, some as guests, and there's a lot, there's a lot of crossover between what I and what Paul believe in. We share a lot of common values, and so it just felt very natural to try and do something together, to try and run something together to share our insights on a particular topic. And Paul suggested actually that we should talk about the biggest taboo word in all of fatherhood, and that is rest, and what that means, and the insinuations with that, the implications, the balance. What it actually means to get rest as a father, and all of we'll unpack all of that. We'll unpack all of the nuances to that, the subtleties, the common misconceptions around what that means. But if you want to jump in, Paul, and just give a bit of background as to why you thought this was a great space, as to why you thought this was a great topic for you and I to discuss, because it was your idea after all.
Yeah, I'd love to, Alec, and thank you for the beautiful introduction there. I completely concur. I think it's wonderful when you can join with people and find people around the world that just share those common values, and it makes your own path more valuable and facilitates discussions like this. And I think it's all about information sharing and doing the best for our kids. So really appreciate your involvement and time and effort. I did recommend this topic, and I guess one of the main reasons why I wanted to discuss rest, and the way I phrased it was, quote, needing a break from the kids, end quote, is because it's something that I'm juggling with in my mind at the moment. And it's topical because I see this kind of platitude everywhere. And it makes it hard as an invested parent, and particularly an invested dad, to walk that line or balance that spectrum between, we're physical and emotional beings that need some sort of recharge, but at the other end of the spectrum, you've got something akin to narcissism, where you can use that as an excuse to justify all manner of self-serving behavior. And I think we can certainly unpack this as well. I think you're, as a parent, your own childhood traumas distort our ability to walk that line in a measured way. And so there's a lot of spinning plates with this topic. So I'm hoping to contribute as much, as I learn out of this. But just as a brief introduction. So someone my wife and I know has been showing all the signs of prioritizing themselves over their kids. And again, I think this is quite common, but there's one particular case, and it comes out in different ways when you can spot it if you have your eye out for it. And so some of the things we've observed is going to the movies while the kids go to daycare, or coffee with friends, hair appointments, which seem to cover for fairly lengthy social outings. And then there's the kind of boys or the ladies' night out where mum or dad needs half a day the next day to recover while the kids are screen parented. And I see all manner of kid-free activities being labelled as self-care necessities, and when you question them, they can often be met with this, well, I need my me time. And so you're left with this sense of every time you do actually need your own me time, you're internally associating that with those selfish activities. So a lot to unpack there, or maybe I can hand back to you to pick an initial direction, but that's kind of where I saw this starting out.
Yeah, I think we'll pick at that thread actually, because I feel like I've been at both ends of both ends of the spectrum almost. I've been just to give another lens to it, I've been the guy who's worked himself to death almost, and martyred himself on his work. And then I've been the guy who doesn't take enough rest because of self-sacrifice, feeling the need to self-sacrifice for just for for everyone, for the family, continuously, even to the point where it's entirely unnecessary. And I'll give you a good example of that. Sometimes, I'll oversleep, or I'll find it difficult to get up in the morning to go to the gym or go work out. and then like a certain threshold of time will pass. Maybe it's say it's 7 a.m. Oh, it's 7 a.m. now. I've missed my opportunity. I've got to get up and I've got to make the kids breakfast. When in reality, actually, my kids don't get up for a while because they're homeschooled. But at the same time, they're old enough to make their own breakfast, and they're old enough to wait a little bit if I still make them breakfast. But I found myself making those excuses unnecessarily, to starve myself of rest, or um, the capacity to recharge or do what I need for me. And I want to go back to what you said, Paul, about you have these individuals within a relationship or a marriage, and they are doing these things, the border on very much border on the line of selfishness, like you said, putting the kids in daycare so they can go get their hair done, or they can go to the cinema, or they can having a ladies' night or a lads' night, and then having to recover for half a day the following day. I wonder, and I didn't expect to go down this tangent, but I always wonder how much the marriage, and sort of the foundations of the marriage and the family come into play there, because I wonder how much of those, if we take a husband and wife, for example, existing within a marriage, how much they're living quite individualistically within the marriage and within the family. And so they are essentially putting each other out by pursuing these spats of selfishness, and then and it almost becomes a tit for tat. And perhaps it's not an intentional tit for tat, well, you've had this, so I need this now. But perhaps it's you're not doing enough in the day to day in the marriage and in the household, and as part of the family. So when you take time away, it's or you take a day or a night or a couple of hours, it's really taking from me because you're now absent in a situation where you're generally quite absent anyway. And so it becomes this, and then the wife feels like, well, actually, I need this now as well because you've just left me with the kids, and it's drained me more than I'm already drained. And now I need this, and then it goes back to the husband thinking, well, you just had 6 hours with the girls, and I had to deal with the kids, and so I wonder how much of that pursuit of selfishness at the expense of the family is down to perhaps a rocky foundation in the marriage, and the way society operates at large, in which society exists quite individualistically right now anyway. We're always taught that self-comfort, self-preservation, indulgence, these are the cornerstones of happiness. These are the cornerstones of fulfillment. And so many people, are getting married later, they're having kids later. And I'm not saying this is everyone, but it feels like a general theme throughout society. But when you spend, like, I don't know, say 30 years living entirely for yourself, and then you go into a marriage, and then you start having kids in your late 30s, it's kind of a tough habit to kick, and I don't mean to sound boastful in that, but my wife and I got married very young. We were fortunate in that sense. I know some people aren't fortunate enough to meet someone they can marry or start a family with young, but we never got. We were married at 19, so we never developed. We never went through our 20s where we just lived purely for ourselves. We were already, it was never something we lost. We never lived a purely individualistic lifestyle. So it was never that oodles of free time and ability to indulge was never taken from us. So we never gave it up in order to be married or gave it up to start a family. We were already life just evolved with each other and with our children. And I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to let you add something because I fear I'll go off on a tangent otherwise.
Oh, thank you. I've been here with jumping up and down with my hand. That I resonate with so much there, and you've really clearly this isn't your first rodeo, as the Americans would say, and you've quite astutely picked up on one of the dynamics at play in that particular relationship that I raised before. So I think you're quite right in describing that oftentimes as the battlefield between the parents that just seems to play out and manifest symptoms in how the children actually experience their childhood. So yes, there are those dynamics at play quite often where there's a tit for tat between the parents, and that's why you see this conflation maybe between me time and an actual physical absence. So the going out for the ladies' night, the cinema, the hairdressing, these all require leaving the household and forcing the other parent or another carer to be put out, so to speak. So I absolutely think that that's to some extent a major factor in this muddled topic of rest. And I also think it possibly flows into one of the solutions that we might get to talking to later on. And that is, earlier on I spoke about how it makes the genuine parents, it makes their job a bit harder because they see this other behavior model and they apply it inappropriately to themselves. Whereas if you view it more as, what am I, and this is a good lens to view parenting through in general, what am I modeling to the children? Is it that battlefield dynamics that becomes more evident as the children mature, or is it genuine self-care? And I think that's a great way to look at it. But look, the age dynamic you mentioned there too is a really interesting one. So, and I wonder if that's less about the age and more about the quality of the relationship in general, because I can certainly see what you said about the self-centered nature of our modern society and how the more you are immersed in that in your younger years, the harder it is to get out. I can certainly appreciate that. But my wife and I are maybe at the other end of the spectrum to you guys. We got married quite late, and I've always valued that. And again, maybe that comes down to our particular personalities and life experiences. In my mind, it gave both of us a chance as individuals to start processing our childhood traumas and get to a certain stage before we came together as a couple. So there was already a foundation of we've had those youthful years where we've made mistakes. We've learned enough about the world to understand that, hey, we've been impacted by our childhood years. And then we came together and we kind of forged this new path together that neither of us would have had a chance of getting close to had we continued as singles. And so I've always valued that there's a certain degree of life experience and self-knowledge that came into the relationship. So I can see that working both ways, and I think it does come down to the individuals. And unfortunately, like many things, like the homeschooling topic as well, like many things, the poor kids are the ones that get bundled up in the collateral damage, don't they? And that tag team parenting thing, just to take one more step in this conversation, I did a little bit of research for this space because I found it hard to imagine that this hasn't been formally studied before, this concept of, what's enough rest for a parent? How do you define it? And oddly enough, I couldn't really find much, which surprised me because it's a pretty big topic, right? It's something you'd expect to be commonly talked about. I did find a few areas of peripheral study. So there were some studies on the effect of work schedules. So in particular, there was an older one, I think from 2011, from the US National Library of Medicine, talks about it's titled Parental Work Schedules and Children's Cognitive Trajectories. So that study found that there's a part of the abstract there that says to juggle family and work demands, parents, particularly those with young children, opt for, quote, tag team parenting by working alternative shifts to ensure at least one of the parents will be with the children. Now, that's arguably indistinguishable from what you've just described with the parents going out to the cinema or whatever, perhaps without the malice, though. And that study concluded that even a night or an overnight shift may leave a parent so fatigued that the quality of parent-child relationship suffers. And it goes on. There are other kind of studies, and I went into narcissism as well. There's a bit of study around that, which in my mind highlights, again, the effect on the children, whether it's through the behavior of a diagnosed narcissist, or just someone in this, tit for tat parental battlefield. And unsurprisingly, the children of narcissistic parents develop avoidant and anxious attachment styles, and it can deeply affect them in forming relationships and insecurity later in life. So I see this broken down into a few sub areas, the topic of rest. So in my daily struggles as a father, I see there's the physical rest side. So that's just I'm just too tired. I finding it hard to keep my eyes open and lift my limbs and throw the kids in the air and that sort of stuff. And there's the emotional rest. And I find that's the hardest. That's the frayed nervous system, the threadbare feeling where you overreact to loud noises and just need a little bit of silence to recalibrate the nervous system. And so I find some of these studies that I looked into in the general discussion doesn't seem to distinguish between the physical presence and the emotional presence. And I've found myself trying to trade off between these two. I can be physically present, but just staring blankly at the wall, and kind of vice versa. So a few thoughts there to maybe unravel.
Yeah, I think the underlying problem there is how nuanced it is and how individualistic it is. Everyone has different needs, and everyone has, by and large, because everyone has different needs, everyone has a different family setup. And so it's really one of those things that's particularly hard to have some tangible data around, I guess. For example, there's plenty of men out there that are very social, very extrovert, if we want to use that word, in the sense that they get recharged by social interaction, and we all do to a certain degree with certain types of people. But I know I find myself, if I'm looking for rest and recharge, that or to recalibrate, I find, as you've just said, I need the peace and the silence. I don't want to go out with people. And so you have those two ends of the spectrum where some people need to be out and they need to be getting that buzz from social interactions, and some people need to be having the silence. And so sometimes if one parent is getting their rest within the house, for example, or they're finding themselves that they can recharge more in the house than they can out of the house, and the other parent has a different need, then it can build, it can lead to that overarching resentment. And I think I've made a few notes myself, and one of the things, my top point, right, my top point is earning the rest, right? And I think this applies both ways, right? But I think my whole social media presence is to do with fatherhood, homeschooling, and but masculinity, and it's from the perspective of a man and a father. And so I genuinely feel, and I've been at that point where I feel like I've asked too much of my wife, and it's taken me a few years to realize that actually, there's the stereotype, where the man has to ask permission from his wife to do something, for example, or there's that image out there, and there's in actuality, what these men aren't doing is earning their rest. Right? And I don't mean that, you're not entitled to it in some degrees, but what I mean is men are asking, and I'm talking purely from a man's perspective, from a father's perspective. They're asking for a lot when the day to day they're not present anyway, and it's not, they're dropping the ball in the day to day, and then they're asking for even more leeway on the weekend, or one day a month, or one day a fortnight, or to go out and do this with some of your friends, or to have a lad's day or a lad's night. And I think the key issue is not finding and not earning it. I think that's where the resentment builds, because even if times are tough, even if you've got young children and they say you're in the trenches, right? If you've earned something, if you've been working hard and you've been present and you've been doing the best you can, and you turn to your spouse, whether that's wife or husband, and you say, "I'd really like to do this," there's a, for the most part, your spouse wants you to be fulfilled. They want you to be happy. They want you to be having a good time. And so they'll make the essentially the sacrifice to take on a bit more work while you go do that, because they understand it's good for your mental health and your emotional health, and your spouse wants that for you. Really, I think it's just, men are or traditionally men are working all day, and then they come home and they're sitting in front of the TV, or they're ignoring the kids, and then all of a sudden you need time to you tell your wife you need to go out with the lads on the weekend, but in reality you're not doing enough to earn that sacrifice from her. And so I think that's a lesson I've learned over the years, is being absent all week and then asking to be absent then on the weekend, or communicating that I want to be absent on the weekend when your other spouse is feeling overwhelmed or feels like they're drowning in the day-to-day responsibility, but you're not pulling your weight there. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Paul.
Yeah, I naturally and unsurprisingly do. Look, that's a really. I'm glad you raised that. Actually, that concept of earning the rest, and I would even take it a step further and say this is one of the core distinctions, maybe, between motherhood and fatherhood. I have a certain and again, maybe this has come through my time in the army or just the life experience, getting into marriage and kids a little bit older. But one of the things I've learned as a man going through life, even before parenthood, was coming to terms with this concept that sometimes men just need to cop it. And I've come to understand that difficulty, when reframed in the right way, can actually be a source of pride, or overcoming difficulty as a man can actually be a source of pride. And we see this, in simplistic forms when you go to the gym and you work out, and all that's easy when you're well rested and it's you engage in that behavior voluntarily. But when you're really in the trenches, as you phrased it before, and you are fatigued and you just want to ... Sometimes as a man, you just have to say, yeah, I want to do that. And that's irrelevant. Just get up and do it. You've got these obligations. And yeah, maybe your partner has been, in the trenches all week while you've been off working. And so what? You've been off working. So that's your obligation. And often I try to reframe that as, yes, I'm working in a day job or out of hours. I've got some other activities that are classified as work. And I'm actually glad to have the opportunity to do that, and to demonstrate not just to my family and to model to my children that work is something that you can endure, and it doesn't kill you. It actually makes you stronger often, but also to myself. There's a sense of pride when you go to bed completely with the tank empty, going, if I still had to get up, I could do it some more. So I love that concept of earning the rest, and maybe earning it not just from the perspective of your partner or your wife, but maybe the threshold for earning it should be higher internally, maybe, is what I'm trying to get at there, where she would say, yes, you've earned that. Maybe we could say to ourselves, yeah, but I could do a little bit more. But it's a hard one, again, because, you can take that to the extreme. But I have found that, and Tony Robbins talks about this, the famous life coach, as well. It's amazing what is still in the tank when you dig deep and you find the right motivations, and the difference between where you think you need a rest and where your body actually shuts down can be quite vast. So, reframing has been an excellent tool that I've lent on personally, to just see a challenge as an opportunity.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's a very, it's a core component right there. It's being fulfilled by what you're doing, and the difference between being exhausted because you've done something that's damn hard work, but it's fulfilling work. And like you said, getting to bed in the night, you feel a sense of pride. Certainly as a man, you feel a sense of pride, and you feel a great sense of accomplishment. And that certainly does play a role. It absolutely plays an element in figuring out what you need. Some people think that they need a rest, but what they really need is fulfillment. And they don't need a break from what they're doing per se. They need to find fulfillment in what they're doing, because they're just trudging along day to day, and it can be exhausting. Of course, it can be emotionally and mentally draining when you're working a job you hate, right? 9 to 5. But if it's draining you and you're coming back to the table then half-assed because you're feeling drained, if you're not able to, they say sometimes men sit in the car for 5 minutes after they pull up on the drive because they've had a stressful day in work and they know they can't bring that back into the house. When they step through the house, they want to have reset, taken the 5 minutes in the car to reset and be ready for the next role they have to play that day, which is father and husband. Because really, as a parent and as a spouse, the work never ends. It's just about finding fulfillment in the work. And when you do, you find you need to go out with the lads less and less. And I'm not saying, and that's just an example. I know people still need to do things, their hobbies, their interests, socialize in that respect, or find fulfillment in other ways. Of course they do. People are complicated beings and they have multiple aspects to their personality. But you'll find, as a man, you'll take less from your children, or you'll take less from your wife if you work harder to find fulfillment in what you're doing. And I think it's actually point 2 on my list, right? It's a very common trap for men to fall into, right? Is the workhorse, right? I think we have such a misunderstanding in society, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I'm sure it's a bit of both. But we have such a misunderstanding of what masculinity is and what masculinity means and what healthy, what a healthy, a mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy man looks like and should act like and needs to be fulfilled in those core aspects, that men grow up with this warped view of what their role should be. And I've done it. I said at the very start, I've been there, where we have such a limited view of what it means to be masculine and to be a man, that we always fall into the trap of workhorse. We lean into the provider aspect of our role almost 100%, and we think that we should be working ourselves into the ground and self-sacrificial to the extreme, because it's a very easy, it's a very easy aspect of masculinity to embody, because you're also making money, and it gives you a great excuse because, I'm tired from work, I'm the one bringing the money in, so it gives me a get out of jail free card for other responsibilities that I have. And that's that self-sacrificial trap. Then, as much as you can promote the excuse that of all the excuses I just mentioned, actually you're building that resentment again, because what you're saying is you're absent, and how you're acting is absent. And so when it comes to these areas of self-care, you are then taking more than you're actually giving, but falling back on the excuse that you're giving a lot because you're working 80 hours a week and you need to do this, or you need to spend what little time you have serving yourself outside of that capacity.
You've really brought my attention to some early memories of mine, actually, and what was modeled to me by my father. I completely see that self-sacrificial trap and that excuse playing out with the almost default masculine behavior of, well, I'll just work myself to the bone, and then I can just say that I've worked myself to the bone, and even if I don't know that I'm doing it, I can see how that's an attractive trap that doesn't doesn't really gel well with the modern world as well, because a lot of our work, in air quotes, today is not really the physical work that it used to be. But I remember my father coming home from, albeit long days, and he did, in air quotes, work hard in a white collar job. And, that fulfillment that you mentioned was a key distinction that, hearing you speak there, made me realize was missing. So he went through the motions. I saw him come home, often late at night in his suit or whatever, and he would help me with some schoolwork or whatever I wanted of him. Sometimes I wasn't that lucky, but I could see that it was just running through the motions. I got the distinct impression that he was doing the thing that, was requested of him in that moment, but there was no fulfillment at all that he was deriving from time with his son. In fact, quite the opposite. I got the impression that he just was waiting to tick that one off for the day, and he could go and, do whatever he wanted to do afterwards. So definitely fulfillment is a core component to that reframing work that I mentioned before. It can actually be restorative in many ways. I'm sure we've all had that experience where you wake up on a Saturday and for a moment you think it's a weekday, and you've got this lethargy about you until it dawns on you that you don't have to work today, and suddenly all this energy emerges and you spring up and make a coffee, and what do we do today? That way you approach the hours ahead of you is so crucial to our lived experience of it. And certainly I've experienced that 5 minutes sitting in the car thing that you described before, that I've got to switch roles now, and really true restoration probably comes not from the ability to switch between different roles, but through better integrating them holistically. And, I try to do what my father did in what I just described there. When I am present with my children, my objective is not necessarily just clocking up the hours with them, but to give them a version of me where they actually are left with the sense that, that's what I prefer doing. I got a lot out of that too. And I use that in my language. Even if I am quite physically tired, I'll say things like, I like talking about that with you. That they can feel then that they are part of my restoration. And the more you verbalize that, it seeds that message not only in the child's mind, but in my own. The more I say to myself, boy, I'm looking forward to reading that book, or just something trivially simple. But when I say to myself, this is restoration for me, as opposed to something that I then need to recover from, yeah, I've found that very powerful.
Yeah, I want to add to that because I've explored this topic a few times before. In fact, I think I may have touched on this in a different space a couple of years ago. But what I think society at large is missing, and what we as individuals are missing, and I still struggle with this, and I'm sure every dad and every mother does, right? But when you get to the end, I'll take today as an example. I was traveling for work yesterday. I didn't get back until late. It was a very long day, and then up again and working today, and then kid stuff and family meals and stuff, and the kids are in bed. I was tired starting this space. Right, I was physically tired starting this space, but coming on and talking and speaking to you, it's energizing, and so it's fulfilling to me. And I've done, it happened to me before. I've sat down, I've recorded a podcast, and because because of the time difference, most of the people I speak to are Americans, so I don't get to do anything until late at night with them. But I come on and I'm instantly recharged, because what I think most people are searching for when they think, right, well, I'm going to spend all day gaming, I'm going to go out all night with the girls or the guys. Right? What I think people are actually searching for, I'm going to binge watch Netflix. They're searching for connection. They're searching for fulfillment. And your Xbox, your PlayStation, going out drinking with or to excess, or binge watching Netflix, they're not actually giving you the rest you think, or you've been conditioned to think you're receiving, right? Because what you're actually asking for is connection and fulfillment. So when you've had a long day from work and you come down and you sit with your children and you read to them, you talk to them, you play board games with them, you do something that initially you think, oh, I am so tired, I don't want to do this. But as soon as you start, as soon as you push through that initial barrier, you actually find yourself coming out the other side much more energized, because what your mind, body, and soul was craving was connection, was fulfillment. It wasn't craving rest per se. It wanted to be recharged. And you don't, sometimes rest is important for recharging, but a lot of the time, your Xbox is not going to recharge you. Your drinking to excess is not going to recharge you. Actually, you just want that connection with someone you care about, whether that be spouse, kids, friend. And you're just searching for fulfillment because, I mean, if you had a very fulfilling day at work, you don't come back tired. You come back energized, right? So or you come back, if you do come back tired, you come back that good tired that you've done, from being so fulfilled throughout the day that, it's been taxing on you, on your mind and your soul to operate at that level, but it's that good kind of tax. You've paid your dues. So I think there's a big misconception there, and that's a thread throughout all of society, is people are searching for connection, and what we're replacing connection with is indulgence, because we've been led to believe that we should be self-serving, and the self is more important than anything else. And so, but actually, what you'll find is connecting and serving others is far more richer than indulging in something. I'm not saying you can't indulge with someone else. You can't binge watch a series with your wife and and share that and talk about it and share that time connecting in that way. But I think there's an easy trap there to fall into. There are men in particular think, well, I need to be doing this for me on my own because, or I want to be gaming all day, or I want to be watching this all day, or I want to be out drinking all day. And actually, that's not really what you wanted.
Indulgence as a proxy for connection makes things far worse. And you've just described the power of language there again. When you attempt to engage in these activities and you label them as rest and necessity for you to be a part of the family, then you've just conflated things that just blow up down the track. I loved what you said there about, that going out with the boys and those sorts of things isn't actually giving you the rest that you're thinking it does. And I think to really put the finger on that, you need to look at the symptoms. So, where there's smoke, there's fire type thing. I find when I'm physically away, as you would be if you're out at the cinema or whatever, what genuinely sticks in my mind, it's an itch that can't be scratched, is I'm often thinking about when I'm back again. I just find that when I'm away, whether it be at the office or working or even out doing yard work, I'm wondering what the wife and kids are doing and whether they can come out. And so I think that's a great symptom, right? Because that means that I'm drawn to this, presumably a high quality connection that I'm just naturally drawn back to whenever I'm absent. So it's the reverse effect of the symptoms we've been describing before, where people think they need the absence of that. And of course it's unfulfilling. And of course you need more of it, like any addiction almost, you need more of it to get the same sort of false kick. So yeah, conflating that sort of problem, I was going to say, trauma almost, but the inability to really deeply find connection with rest is a real issue, and we need to get the language, more tightly defined, I think, and that will lead us to some solutions. And Tony Robbins, again, I've mentioned him before, talks about this. When you really boil it down, he has this little segment where he talks about what gives you energy, and he asks people, and people say, well, it's food. food gives you energy. And he says, well, how do you explain those who, I'm sure many have experienced this themselves, myself included, where you'll fast for 12, 24, 36 hours and actually feel like you've got more spring in your step, than you did when you were bogged down with a lot of food. And conversely, when you have a big, Christmas dinner or something, all you want to do is sleep. So to some extent, food nourishes your body, but largely we use it as a drug almost. We don't use it for its energy. And some people say sleep gives you energy, and we've already covered the fact that you can get by with far less than your body actually requires. And I've seen sleep deprivation training in the army. It's amazing what you're still capable of doing when there's a purpose. When there's a genuine purpose that gets you to spring out of bed, and you as you described with running these spaces and these conversations, I had a couple of cups of coffee this morning before this, but I knew I didn't need them. That was more just a preference thing. And on Tony Robbins goes, and really, that purpose, that connection is what we must lean on to avoid these traps. The self-sacrifice trap you mentioned earlier, and the trap of thinking that separation is the key to unity. It's actually quite the opposite.
I like that. I like that phrase, or that sentiment, because that's what we do feel a lot of the time, don't we? Is that you need time away from things, from your responsibilities, to rest, when in actual, or to recharge, when perhaps there's truth to that. I think a kernel of truth to that, but I think one of the key messages we miss is that, as you've just said, maybe we need a bit more responsibility, but fulfilling responsibility. When certainly as men, I think we like to rise to the occasion. We like, as you said, we'd like to see what we're actually capable of, and figure that out through hardship and through challenge. But it's got to be the right mindset. You've got to have the right outlook on it, because otherwise you'll just see it as a chore for the sake of being a chore. Now, I want to shift slightly, and because we've talked about a lot of selfishness in the sense of taking from our families, taking from our spouses, and indulging, and having that separation element. And I want to shift now to what may be the other side of the coin, right? And I've got this point down on my notes, and it's based off. And you talked about sentiments or platitudes you've seen all the time, and they're ever prevalent on Twitter. But the famous one is, you can't pour from an empty cup. Right, because and it's absolutely true. It's never as simplistic as that. But the thing I've written down is, responsibility without rest equals resentment. Right, and I think there's the other side of the coin to that selfishness, is being overly self-sacrificial, is martyring, and that's a real trap in parenthood as well. Is becoming a parental martyr. Right, and being the person, trying to be everything for everyone all of the time, and burning yourself out that way, because it's not just about, okay, you could be doing really fulfilling things some of the time, but not everything you're going to do in your life is fulfilling, right? Not every day is going to be as fulfilling as the next, and you can, in an effort to, I don't know. I'm sure you'll have something to comment on with childhood and unpacking some trauma there. But it's that line of thinking where you don't feel you deserve a rest. So we have the opposite side there. We just talked about earning a rest, but what about those? What about those men? What about those parents that don't feel they deserve a rest? Almost a punitive, masochistic or sadistic element to their personalities, where they're doing too much for everyone all the time because they feel like they don't deserve a rest. But then when you do that, you do begin to you do begin to resent people. If you're constantly bending over backwards for people, for your kids, for your wife, for other family members, for other, for friends, or for work, for example. I want, do you have anything to unpack from that?
Absolutely. No, nothing at all. Yeah, you actually mentioned the exact word that I was going to dance around, and that's trauma. So where do we start? I wonder if those who say you can't pour from an empty cup really wonder why the cup's empty. Is the cup truly empty because of work, or is it empty because of trauma that's possibly happened decades ago? So I've spent a fair bit of time over years trying to delve into that component of myself. And one of the pillars that has kind of revealed itself to me is this sense of self-worth. So that overly sacrificial kind of martyring behavior, I think, is characteristic of um, a view of oneself where it's no matter what I do, it's never enough because my work is not of a high enough quality. Therefore, I have to compensate through time, or my company is not engaging enough. Therefore, I need to provide more of it. That type of uh, putting yourself at a position where the goals that you set for yourself in a relationship or a household or as a father are never obtainable. So, of course, the cup becomes empty because you've structured your life in a way that that's always the case. So why is that? Well, some of it, I think, could be learned behavior. So, again, I've unpacked some of this from my childhood. I saw, as part of the dynamic between my parents, this worth pillar coming up, and the various kind of manifestations of that I recall. But yeah, that overworking, unnecessarily working, I saw crop up, and as a child, when you come to the age of reason, the age of thought, you quite rightly question, why is this? Why does mum or dad do this? That's unnecessary, and one of the conclusions I drew, and I kind of when I pieced this together, I saw it in my own behavior, and when I saw it in my own behavior, I could start tackling it. Part of what was modeled to me in my childhood was this, and I don't know if this has been spoken about anywhere else. It's just a term that I've come up with, but it was sympathy as a currency. So in my childhood, in my household, the more you could make people feel sorry for you, the the better. It was cash in the bank. It was a currency. Sympathy was a currency. And that came out as, oh, this bad thing happened to me today, and people might feel sorry for you. Or I've been working a lot, but I'm going to come home and do some more work, and oh, I feel sorry for you. That's just one of the areas that I had modeled to me. And when I saw that, I thought, when you dispassionately view that, you say, why on earth would sympathy be a currency, and particularly one that you'd want to actually accumulate? And then you can kind of tackle that. So the more I found, I dealt with my own traumas and developed a native sense of self-worth, the more I could more clearly identify this work is valuable, and this work is I don't know, virtue signaling, or whatever the current phrase is for it. It's something that I'm pursuing alternate goals through. So yeah, it's that type of behavior. I think the key to unraveling that type of behavior is a journey within. It's, in my experience, got very little to do with the external world, the things that you think need doing, or the relationships that you think need certain activities. It's understanding that you are valuable as a father, and part of what you need to model to your children, particularly to boys, I feel, because they are the ones more likely to fall into that work trap that we mentioned before. They need to understand that they are inherently valued and loved, and work itself is such a valuable thing to be able to undertake, as I mentioned before, when called upon for the right reasons. Sacrificing yourself for the family is a wonderful thing, but only for the right reasons. And I find, it's actually quite rare that the need to sacrifice yourself on some altar actually presents itself. They're often just manifestations of childhood trauma. So there are my thoughts. You quite accurately picked where I'd go with that one, I feel.
Yes, yeah, and I think you touched on two words then that I think, gosh, I think every man must struggle with, or unless they're narcissistic, but self-worth, right? And that is something that is something I absolutely struggle with today, even. And I feel like I've come a long way over the last couple of years, but I don't think there's ever a quick fix to it or an easy fix to it. Um, and there's even times now where I'll give an example. Where I'll like put myself to one side unnecessarily because of some reason I've given myself, and without even thinking about what that reason is, I've just made it. I've made my mind up, and actually, my wife will call me out and say, "Well, why? Why do you need to do that instead of this? Why do you need to be here instead of there?" Like a good example is even now sometimes going to the barbers, to keep my hair in check. And I'll say, "Oh, I'm too busy here and I'm too busy there and I'm too busy doing this, or I've got to do this and I've got to help you with that." And she's like, "No, you don't. You need to go do that. You need to go take time to do that because it's part of, it's part of, it helps you, feel better about yourself. It helps, you look better traveling for work. It gives you more confidence. But you needed to go take that, 30 minutes, an hour to go drive to the barbers and get a haircut and come back, whereas, and that's, that's just one example where I'm making up excuses just as the default for why I haven't done something. And actually, when you stop to think about it, it's all a bit stupid, really. And what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, but you don't give it any particularly constant or concerted thought as to why you've made this decision. Because for some people, it's just the default mindset. It is just their default mindset, and I've no doubt that comes from my childhood, and it comes from many men's childhood, where the default mindset is based on low self worth, and so you don't. If you're not consciously making those decisions, your subconscious will always revert to this setting until, I guess, you can train your mind out of it.
100% agree. And this is the value, of having a close relationship, relationships in general, but particularly with your wife at home. You mentioned sometimes when you make your mind up on things, often subconsciously, and your wife will call you out on it and say, "Well, why do you need to do that?" That's love. That's true value. That's support. And I've experienced exactly that same example with the barber. Just the simple act of having a shave is something that you can indefinitely put off as a man. And sometimes, just recently, I caught myself in the mirror and I just looked homeless. I just looked disheveled. And I thought to myself, well, what's that modeling? And so I took half an hour, and I have a straight blade razor that takes me quite a long time, but I just think there's a certain air of masculinity and James Bond style refinement about straight blade shaving, and I take my time with it, and there's an element of risk about it as well. I kind of love all that stuff, and there's a small part of my life where I can live dangerously, so to speak, and just cleaning up the edges on the beard and getting it all to a nice length, and boy, I looked in control of everything around me. And what that signaled to me when I looked at myself in the mirror was alarming. I can't imagine the effect it would have on the kids in particular. So yeah, it's so important to have a support network around you. And we kind of started that space with the concept of the tit for tat parenting. Again, a lot of the impacts on children are absolutely downstream from the core relationship, the marriage. And I've had that experience in other areas too, where you need do nothing with the children. You fix the upstream issues and everything downstream just slots into place. Don't chase the symptoms, but go after the cause, and view these people who are willing to put themselves in uncomfortable situations, often to call you out on things or question things, are the people you want around you. That's love and support. So yeah, the supporting each other, and the being able to question yourself. I think when other people call you out on things, and it doesn't necessarily mean confrontational, just say why. Please devote 30 seconds of conscious thought to that which you've already decided. Can be amazing tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important for, another platitude you see, and it's, as much as it's a platitude, it's absolutely true. But, one of the most important decisions a man will ever make is the woman he marries, because, that's part of what you need occasionally from a spouse. And also the whole core concept of brotherhood around men. And I'm not going to go into lots of detail because that's an entirely different spaces, right? But having that connection with people who will call you out, who do see the worth that you bring, or the worth that you have, that sometimes you lose sight of yourself. It really helps to center yourself again. And so the, this concept of what we've just talked about, of recharging, of rest, of being fulfilled. I think the point you made really hits it home, in the sense that start at the top, because what people are doing is, everyone's very busy in their day-to-day lives. I think society doesn't help with that, keeping everyone busy, keeping everyone distracted. But really what we're doing is, we're trying to and use the bucket to take the water off the ship rather than fixing the holes. And so even if we're spending time with the kids, or we're spending time with a spouse, are we doing it properly? Are we actually present? Are we genuinely present? Because you could just you run the risk of going through the motions. And kids, everyone, anyone you share a connection with, they can pick up on when you're not present. They can pick up on when you're not there in mind, body, and soul. And so when you think of when we think of and I think we're going to, it's a good place to leave it. But when we think of rest and recharging, and when we have this, there's this misconception, the difference between self-care and selfishness. Many people's default opinion is, oh, I'm being selfish. But actually, if you're just taking a little bit of time here and there to be conscious about your decisions, conscious about the time you spend, and you are taking some time to genuinely recharge, you're becoming a better spouse and father for it. If you're making the effort to make sure and this could be through a number of steps. It could be changing your job. It could be just changing your mindset about your job. It could be making sure that you come home and you spend the next hour or so being fully present. You just, for lack of a better word, you suck it up. You realize, actually, I feel a bit tired now, but I know if I just push through for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to feel great. Getting a board game out and playing with the kids might sound awful, right this second, because I'm so tired. But if I do it, I know I'm going to feel great. The kids are going to feel great. Their energy is going to recharge me. So I think there's the takeaway really is, if reflect on your decisions, reflect on what you actually need, mind, body, and soul. And if you do that, and you do take some time, and sometimes that looks like time to yourself, sometimes that looks like time just you and your wife. Sometimes that looks like time with your kids. But when you do that, you're actually doing the self-care that you need to need less time away. And then to increase the quality of time you're actually spending while you're not away.
They are some great concluding thoughts there, Alec. I completely resonate with that. In fact, this conversation's given me, and I started by saying this, I was hoping to contribute and learn, and it's certainly given me some things that I could play with mentally and reframe a little. But I love what you said there about bailing out the ship rather than fixing the holes. Boy, men can do a lot of bailing before someone taps them on the shoulder, can't they? And that running through them, that running through the motions thing, as I described, that my father modeled to me. We need to be alert to when that starts happening. And some of the key takeaways, I guess, from our chat here is that the quality of language. With that, these one word or single sentence platitudes or phrases are so deceptive, and they can just lead us astray because they rely on various interpretations and personal history to bring any meaning to. But ultimately, I think that if you've got a sense of self-worth, or you're on the path to obtaining one, you have at the beginning of a toolkit that will allow you to distinguish between appropriate work and sacrificial work. And from there, you can get that earning the rest concept that you opened with as well, because earning the rest comes from genuinely contributing to the household, not just running on a mouse wheel or an exercise bike and saying, well, here come the excuses. I've been working all day. I bring in the income. That there's the resentment. So, and the last couple of words that I've cherry picked from our conversation, I think connection that you mentioned was a big one. That valuing that primary relationship with the spouse, with your wife, and understanding that the kids are downstream from that. That's one that I struggle with to this day, but I'm working on. And mindset, you mentioned that one there too in your concluding thoughts, that to the way you frame things almost entirely dictates your relationship with the experience. So really valuable conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time, especially as you said you were ironically tired when starting the space, and hopefully we've managed to do something about that.
Now I'm buzzing now, and your closing remarks then just really made me think. What if we were to sum it all up? It's pursue connection, don't chase indulgence, right? And I think if more men pursued connection and chased indulgence less, they'd actually find themselves a lot more recharged. Because as as you and I have talked at length on this spaces, that's not what we're conditioned to pursue to chase indulgence, but that's not what we really need or want. It's the connection we want.
I love it. I think that's a tweet right there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that might be
it's wonderful when a conversation can be succinctly wrapped up like that, but I completely concur. Yeah, and
Look, it's
really value your insights.
Yeah, likewise. It's been fantastic. I appreciate you getting up early. And it's Australia seems to be the most difficult time zone for me to connect with. If you were, I know I'm quite close with some guys in New Zealand, and actually the additional couple of hours that they're ahead of you actually pushes it back into the realm of reasonableness. So,
yeah, it's so bad it's good.
yes. But I appreciate you making the time to jump on, and I know we had some
no problem at all. What's an early morning when it comes to building a better future for the kids?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul.
My pleasure. Be happy to do it again.
Great conversation for me.
Likewise. Be happy to do it again. Thank you, and a good evening.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.